Hello and welcome to this Corgi Engine video. I'm Renaud from our mountains, and today we're going to have a look at all the new stuff that is included in version 6.0 of the Corgi Engine. We've got quite a few features to cover today. The first of which is the addition of the feedbacks system to the engine. That's all, all the cool stuff that you see, all the particles, screen shakes, post-process effects, all that stuff that now you can add to your game really easily. There will be a dedicated tutorial on that, so I won't dig too much into it, but just so you know, the way it works is pretty much every ability in the game now, in the asset, such as, let's say, dive, can have a feedback. So for example, if I look at the dash, you can see that every time I dash now, I get a trail, I get this sort of ripple effect, there's a sound, and so much more. And the way it works is simply on my character dash, I attach a dash feedback, which is an feedbacks component. And this one, as you can see, triggers some particles, cinemachine impulse, a sound, and some bloom post-process effect, which makes everything a bit shiny as I dash. For each feedback, you can tweak a bunch of stuff, such as the chance it has to happen. So for example, if I lower the chance of the dash particles to emit, you can see that this time I didn't get any, and like once every 2 times approximately I'll get some. I can trigger a delay, so now they get played. I would have to exit actually because this is cached, but you could add a delay, you can have that thing repeat, and then for each feedback you've got specific stuff, such as in this case I can define particle system, and I could move it to position if it wasn't part of my character already. And just like that, you can add much more. You can have post-process effects, bloom and all that. You can have cinemachine impulse, haptics if you own, nice vibrations, tons of stuff on the game object. You can trigger an animation, enable a behavior, have some flicker, instantiate objects, and so on. There are like 30 feedbacks in all, and they are all built in the engine, so they will all work natively. Next, we have the appear-disappear system, which, as you can see, is in full effect right now. So the way it works is, and I'm gonna select one of these things, one of these cubes, when they appear. Yeah, okay. So here I have a retro appearing block, and as you can see, it's made of some simple stuff, a sprite renderer, an animator that handles these animations, and an appear-disappear script. I also have a box collider 2D, which, as you can see, is enabled and disabled as my appear-disappear thing cycles. I can decide from its inspector whether it's active. I can define its initial state. It can be visible, hidden, transitioning from visible to hidden, or transitioning from hidden to visible. I can decide how it starts. This one starts automatically, but I could have it start only on player contact or via script. I could have, like, let's say a switch that my character activates, and it activates this appear-disappear thing. I can decide on an offset, duration offset. So it will like these 3 at the top. They are on an initial offset, so they, like this one is on 0.5, this one 0.1, this one 1, and this one 1.5. So they cycle in a bit of an offset, which makes it look nice. I can define visible duration. Each of these is random, so I can say if I want it to be every 2 seconds, I put 2 and 2, but it could be between 0 and 2, and it would be random between 0 and 2. Visible duration, hidden duration, the time it takes to transition from one to the other. I can have feedbacks every time some state changes. I can have bindings that let me automatically update the animator I can force the collider to disable or enable. Same thing for the renderer. And I can have a trigger area around it that lets me define. I think the first one has one. This guy, if it comes back, yeah. Where are you? Over here. I have a trigger area, and while my character is in it, you can see I have a character detector on it, and this one only starts on player contact. So if I start again, you'll see how it works. All of these are going to disappear, but this guy is staying there until I step on it, and then it starts disappearing and coming back. So it makes for nice, you know, environmental puzzles and stuff. It's a nice feature to have. Another new feature that I quite like will be in the minimal rooms in display. I'm just gonna go and press play on this. So now, as you can see, when I enter the room, instead of having just a regular fade in, fade out, I get this sort of circular fade in and fade out. That's just a nice transition. It works using the same systems, the fade events. So you can have a round fader, as I call them, or you can have a regular fader. The way it works is in your UI camera, somewhere you could have a regular fader, which is just a black screen, or you can have a fade around. I would suggest copying that setup. It's made of a mask and a background. The cool thing is you can have the mask be whatever you want, which leads to some cool stuff. I think this one is set up like that. No, it's not. One of them is. Maybe this one. Yes. Okay, so as you can see, this one retro mountains every time. By the way, you're seeing a slightly modified version of Retro Mountains. That's a sneak peek of version 6.1. But every time I trigger this fader, it goes in the shape of a Corgi. So it's a nice touch. And you can have that shape be whatever you want. If you look at how it's done, you go into Canvas, fade around, and right here, you can see that my mask is simply just a drawing of that, but you could use any sort of shape you want. And yeah, if you want to make sure that your mask is well centered, you want to have your camera positioned correctly. So I'm going to select my rig, and I'm going to make sure that it's more or less at the right position for my new. Because I was playing with that since, so I moved the start position around, the level start, this thing. So I'm going to move my level start, let's say here, and I'm going to move my camera to be more or less centered on that. So now when I press play, yeah, it's much better. And you can have these fades triggered anytime you want. The fade around listens to events, and on it you can see some buttons that will let you test your things, test your transitions. So for example, if I do you need to put a debug world position target on it. So at runtime you can do just this, clear the console, and fade out, fade in, fade out, and fade in. And of course, you can just play with that, tweak the values. You can define the duration. You can have it being a linear twin, but it can be any of these curves that are predefined for you. So, for example, if I change it to is out elastic, maybe, you know, why not? If I change it again, you see that it's less linear and faster at the end. So just a nice tool for you to have, and more options. Let's have a look at another new feature. I'm going to select my level manager here. I'm in the retro AI demo scene. I'm going to select my character, the retro Corgi, and I'm going to look at its handle weapon component, which as you've guessed is handling the weapon, basically pressing the trigger every time it gets an input. And from there I can decide to buffer input, which is a new feature. And I can also decide that every new input extends the buffer, and here I can define the duration of the buffer in seconds. What this thing does, and it's particularly useful for combo weapons. I'm gonna grab these two weapons, I'm gonna switch to my sword, and this sword is a combo sword. So if I press repeatedly, you see that I can do 3 different attacks. Without input buffering, I would have to press slightly after the end of the first attack for my next attack to trigger, and I have some sort of grace period during which if after the first attack I input a second attack soon enough, then the combo continues. But that wouldn't work if I were to press twice the attack button before the first attack happens. So now if I do, you can see that I'm pressing, or maybe you can hear, my keyboard is quite loud. If I double press, it's going to do 2 attacks. And my second press came before the first attack was finished, and that's input buffering. It's just a nice feature to have if you want your combos to be more user-friendly and less hard to pull out. So as you can see, quite simple to set up. Simply on your character handle weapon, you turn that on. It will work for all weapons, and you can just define how long you want that to last. While we are in this scene, I'm going to show you one more thing. If I select my retro Corgi, I believe the squash and stretch is new as well, so I'm going to demonstrate that. If I manage to get high enough, if you look at the Corgi character, you can see that it stretches as it falls down. It actually stretches as it gains speed. This is done via this thing. So if I go to my scene view, this is my retro Corgi character here in the scene. At the top level I have all my logic, so that would be the collider's definition and all the classes that make it move and do stuff. Then I have an empty, it doesn't have like a model, it just has this class. I've got an empty node here where I have my squash and stretch script, and then below that I have my model container, which itself contains the model, which contains the animator and so on. What this thing does is it lets me deform this node here and the container to match my character's speed and direction. So the cool thing is you can use different things. As we don't really rely on rigid body and rigid body 2D, I suggest you use position. You can define the intensity of it. You can define the maximum velocity of your character. So let's say your character runs at a top speed of 50, for example, you want to increase that. And then you can define the minimum and maximum scale. So let's say if I want something more extreme and probably ugly looking in this case, I can do something like this. And now every time I jump, you can see that I stretch much more. If now I change my maximum velocity to be, let's say 1, you can see that the thing, the squash and stretch happens much faster. And it also matches my direction, which is nice because I'm not just changing my Y scale, I'm actually deforming the character. And that gives you this nice game feel. It's just super fun to play with. Of course, you want to have something subtle. This is probably too much, but depending on the style you're going for, you can play with that, and you can change the intensity of it to something maybe much. Yeah, this is maybe too much, but at least you've got the option. But what I wanted to show you is not the squash and stretch. Actually, I wanted to go with the animator. So In the past, and pretty much since the release of the Corgi Engine, I've been getting tons and tons and tons of questions about animation and how to set up an animator. The Corgi Engine doesn't really do stuff with animation. All it does is send animation parameters to the animator. So most of the demos, they rely on something that I would call the any state pattern. If I go, for example, into the minimal and I select the rectangle character, open it, and if I display its animator, this is what I mean. So this is an any state pattern. From any state, every time I get a new parameter, let's say now I'm diving, I go into diving. If I'm crouching, I go into crouching. This works fine for the demos, and for a long time I thought this would be enough. You know, this demonstrates that the engine just works. But I've been getting so many requests for something that could be used to learn that I decided to add one. So in the retro, I'm gonna select my retro Corgi again. I've made something more traditional, and now if you look at that animator, that's closer to something that you would see in an actual production. Instead of everything going from any state, but still quite a lot of things still do, some stuff now goes and stays between its state. So for example, when I'm idle, I have a transition to go into crouching, and from crouching I can go into crawl, and then I go back to idle and so on. So really, the engine is agnostic when it comes to animation. You can do something more traditional like this. You can do something crazy. You can do blend trees. You can do substates. You can do anything. The important part to remember is that you need this. You need these parameters, or at least the ones that you're going to use, but you need to match the names. The only exception being, of course, the weapon animation parameters, which are left to your own choices. You can set them on the weapon component itself, but for, like, let's say grounded, you want to use grounded. For crouching, you want to use exactly crouching. And from there, you know, it's just a matter of setting up the animator. This one gives you a more, I would say, again, traditional approach to animators, and something that will give you more control over how you blend from one state to the other. Maybe when going from idle to crawl, you want a fast transition, but if you're going from crouch to crawl, maybe you want something slower. This is the kind of pattern, the kind of animator that lets you do that. If you were only going from any state to a new state, well, it's going to be very limited and might just work for something where you don't really care about transitions. Now, that said, every animator is really specific to each game, so just copying that is probably not just going to work, and you'll have to read on Unity's website or wherever about animators, because they are a tricky thing, and learning how to set up these transitions can take some time because it looks simple, but really depending on what you're trying to do, it can be a painful process. What I would be careful of, especially if you're new to this, is the exit time. So every time you make a new transition, so let's say I create an empty state here and I want to move from idle, if I want to move from idle to my new state, I just created a new transition. Let's say I want to move when wall jumping is true, I want to go to this state. If you're not careful and don't change these two first things, every time you're, let's say, wall jumping Boolean is true, it won't go from idle to state directly. It will wait until the exit time. So here you will see like a progress bar going. you will have to wait till the progress bar is complete to go there. And unless you're doing something specific, you don't want that. Let's say you never want an idle animation to complete before going to a jump state. So to fix that, you just type in 0 here, remove this, and now you just have to adjust the transition duration. So if you have a long transition duration, it's going to blend from idle to that new state. But if you just say 0, then every time that boolean, that trigger, or whatever condition is met, you go from here to here. And when debugging, when setting up an animator, it might help to just put everything to 0 like that, because that way you get an instant result and you can check if at least your whole graph is working. And once it's working, you can come back to it and add more transitions, more blending, and make sure it's still working. It's a nice way of setting things up, but feel free to do it any way you want. There's no rules. The only important part is that you respect the parameters names. And while we're on the subject of animation parameters, they are now hashed. This doesn't really impact you unless you've extended classes and are now wondering why your animator update methods are not working anymore. It's all explained in details in the documentation, but I'll go over it quickly. I'm just going to open a new class, so character jump, and as you can see here, I now have a bunch of new variables. So I'm actually going to be moving to a simpler one, maybe grip. Yeah, grip. All right. So grip only has only drives one animation parameter, and as explained here and in the documentation, that parameter is gripping, and it's a boolean. So now in all classes that update animation parameters, unless I've forgotten one, but I don't think so. If I have, please let me know. I'm interested. I have animation parameters, variables here. They are protected, and the first one is a string constant, and it's gripping. Okay, and now I have an int, and I'm going to use that int to store a hash, so like an encoded version of that string, so I don't use strings at runtime. It makes updating all the parameters much faster. It doesn't make a huge difference if you only have a few characters, but it makes a difference if you have many. And so I declare these variables, and here I have my ability method where I initialize these animation parameters, and you can see I register this string and I output this int. And this method, register animator parameter, it adds the parameter to a list, so I make sure that the parameter actually exists. It checks for its existence once, and then every time I update, I simply update my int and not the string anymore. Just a slight small performance improvement, but nice to have. And if you want to create new animations or update new parameters, feel free to use this method. Of course, you can still use Unity's native set bool, set float using a string. It won't break. It's just, I think, better to do it that way. So another big change that came with version 6.0 of the Corgi Engine is the support for packages from the package manager. So the package manager is a new way that Unity has, well, new, it's been around for a while, but that's how Unity now distributes features and that are not part of the core. So the engine takes advantage of that now, and natively you'll have support for the Pixel Perfect package, the Cinemachine right here, and the post-processing. Of course, you can use more packages, and there are many to install if you want, but like there's all that. But these three that I mentioned, so Cinemachine, Pixel Perfect, and post-processing, are now built in into the asset, and that lets you, for example, trigger feedbacks. We've seen the bloom before, but you can control using feedbacks. You can control color grading, lens distortion, chromatic aberration, bloom, vignette, and a bunch of others, depth of field. So there's that, and there's also Cinemachine built in now. So it comes with its own, if I select the right camera rig, you can see that here I have my regular camera. So it's just a normal camera, but it has a Cinemachine brain. You can also see here the post-process layer and the pixel perfect camera. But for Cinemachine, all you need is the brain, and then you need one or more Cinemachine cameras, virtual cameras, and here is one. And from there you'll be able to control very finely, because in my opinion that's one of the best pieces of software out there. It's amazing. It's all you need to create cameras. And now much more of the control, much more of the feel of the camera, the speed and all, the damping will be left to Cinemachine, and the camera controller, the part that is part of the Corgi Engine, will do much less. Of course, you can, if you prefer, you can still use the previous camera controller. It's still there somewhere. If you go into common scripts, regular, you'll find the camera controller. It's been untouched. It still works. It's still very much supported. But if you want to use Cinemachine, and like I know I never do a project without it now. Well, you've got the Cinemachine camera controller. It will let you start and stop following a player. It will let you confine to camera bound, to level bounds. You'll be able to define how high you want to look when you look up, the speed of the character and stuff like that. Works with orthographic, works with in 3D with perspective, but you can tweak all your stuff, and you can do that in real time, like you would in any Cinemachine project. So you get these nice gizmos, and you can define your X damping and your screen X, and that gives you much more options, I think, to do really something unique. That kind of things. Really, there's no need to use anything else than Cinemachine. Just getting something to that level for cameras, I don't think it's a good use of your time now. So use that tool, it's really cool. I've got one more thing to show you, and then it will be the end of this video. And that thing is pickable actions. So pickable actions are a new class of items that you can pick in a level, just like you could pick keys and all that stuff. That lets you trigger an event, a Unity event, on anything you want. So it's a nice way of saying, hey, if I grab this key, this whatever, then something happens in my world. It doesn't even have to be something that is visible. So you can use that same thing to have a character enter a zone and something else happens. And it can be anything. So we're going to create something using that. For this test, I'm in the features keys demo scene, but it will work anywhere. And I'm going to need something to pick. So I'm going to select this key right here, the yellow key picker. I'm going to duplicate it, move it out of the way, and I'm going to move it over here. It has an inventory pickable item. It would put a key in my inventory, but I'm just going to remove that. But first I'm going to unpack the prefab, just so I have something that is, its own thing. So right now I have a visual representation of it, sprite renderer, and I have my box collider 2D, which has to be trigger. And I can get rid of the pick feedback. I'm gonna keep it. And I'm gonna add the component. I want to type pickable action. And yeah, I still have my pick feedback, so I'm just gonna put it here. I'm gonna disable the renderer on pick, not the object maybe, and disable the collider so it doesn't get picked again. I'm gonna put it here. I'm gonna rename that thing to, I don't know, door opener. And what I want to do with it is, when I pick it, I'm gonna open that door. Normally this door in this demo, you would have to pick this key here and approach that door, maybe press a button and the door would open. But with this, you can just say, hey, I'm picking this, so this thing will open. I'm gonna change its color just so we don't, yeah, like that. And so here I have my pickable action, I have my pick event, and all I have to do is say, hey, I want this object, so that would be the minimum yellow door. I want this yellow door. No, wrong. Don't do that. I select my opener and I select my minimal yellow door. I drag and drop it into my pick event, and then it's actually a moving platform, and I just say authorize movement, which is, as you've guessed, you know, something that makes it move. So now if I press play, I'm in my scene. I don't take that yellow key over there. I grab this, and as you can see, it opens. So this works for doors, but you could make an enemy explode, you could make a whole world appear or disappear, you could make anything that has a public method. You could make a character jump, you could make some crazy stuff. Let's actually do that. Let's make a character jump. That's a fun thing to do. I'm gonna remove this action. I'm gonna put what? Yeah, I'm gonna put not an adventure one. Let's grab a normal retro corgi, like this guy. And instead of making it a player, I'm gonna say it's an AI, so that way when I move around, it doesn't get my input, it just stays there. Whoa, I'm getting errors. Character push corgi controller. Yeah, because this thing wants me to be a player. So now if I press play, you can see that I have this guy here, it does nothing. And if I grab this, it does nothing because we haven't bound it to an action. So I'm gonna take my door opener and I'm gonna rename it Corgi Jumper or something. And then I can take my retro corgi, which is over there. And if I just add a new action here in my pickable action, and I go character jump, which must be somewhere, and I say jump start. Now every time I grab this object, this black thing here, the corgi would jump. So yeah, using this pickable action thing, you can control anything that you want. As long as it has a public method and you can find it, you can control whatever you want. It's a nice way to create puzzles in your levels, and a nice class to have around. That's pretty much everything that is majorly new in 6.0. The rest can be seen in the release notes. You'll see that there are tons of bug fixes, tons of quality of life improvements here and there, but they don't really fit in a video like that. There's much more coming. I have reached a state now of stability that I very much like, so creating new features is much easier than it could have been in the past, and it's very easy to build upon that strong foundation now. Having the feedbacks built in to the system now lets me make something that is much more polished. So there are really good ways coming in the next updates. I hope you like that. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.